Does it take your breath away and you feel yourself suffocating? Does the pain weigh out the pride and you look for a place to hide? Did someone break your heart inside? You're in ruins. 121 guns, lay down your arms, give up the fight. 121 guns, throw up your arms into the sky, you and I. When you're at the end of the road and you lost all sense of control and your thoughts have taken their toll, when your mind breaks the spirit of your soul, your faith walks on broken glass and the hangover doesn't pass. Nothing's ever built to last. You're in ruins. 121 guns, lay down your arms, give up the fight.
Hey, everybody. It's the bottom of the hour. We're going to give this one a try. 6 o'clock Dad Rock at its special 6:30 time, as you do. But we're going to give it a couple more minutes to get all settled in, because apparently starting at the bottom of the hour means you have to start a couple minutes later. It's math. So, grab yourself a snack, get yourself something to drink, get all cozy. 6 o'clock Dad Rock Talk will begin in about 4.5 minutes.
Did you stand too close to the fire, like a liar looking for forgiveness from a stone? When it's time to live and let die, and you can't get another try, something inside this heart has died. You're in ruins. 121 guns, lay down your arms, give up the fight. 121 guns, throw up your arms into the sky. 121 guns, lay down your arms, give up the fight. 121
trick, the one that makes me scream, he said, the one that makes me laugh, he said, and threw his arms around my neck. Show me how you do it, and I'll promise you, I promise that I'll run away with you. I'll run away with you. Spinning on that dizzy edge, I kissed his face and kissed his head, and dreamed of all the different ways I had to make him go. Why are you so far away, he said, and won't you ever know that I'm in love with you, that I'm in love with you. You, soft and only you, lost and lonely you, strange as angels dancing in the deepest ocean, twisting in the water. You're just like a dream. You're just like a dream. Daylight licked me into shape. I must have been asleep for days, and moving lips.
Welcome to the Virtual Stab Comedy Theater. It's time for 6 o'clock Dad Rock Talk. Please welcome to your screen 6 o'clock Dad Rock Talk.
Hey folks, welcome to the show. This is 6:30 o'clock Dad Rock Talk. Yes, it's a special show, so it requires a special time. I'm Corey Behringer, joined as always by my co-host. He's rootin', but he's also tootin'. Court Hansen, how you doing, Court?
It's funny you should phrase it like that. So my girlfriend's aunt, she works at the co-op, and sometimes she'll give us expired food. And
Sure.
I ate these cabbage chips that were called Kraut Crisps that she brought us. And I knew they were expired, but I didn't know how expired they were. And so I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, having nightmares from how badly the food hurt my stomach. It was bizarre.
Oh,
I was having just gruesome dreams because of these chips that I had eaten. Yeah.
now I gotta ask, did you eat the whole bag?
I ate a bowl of 12 total. And the first 3, it was okay, this is fine. They taste weird. They're cabbage chips, which is disgusting. And then, and so I ate about 12 to 15 of them, probably the recommended serving size on the bag. But by the time I reached the end of the bowl, I wanted to die. And then this morning, when I was really feeling awful, I looked at the expiration date, and it's several months back, not just a couple weeks.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm good.
Well, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
And as much as I would love to just have a deep dive into all your colon talk, we're not here to talk about that this week. We're here to talk about Graham Parson and all the Wild West of dad rock and roll. That's what we're here this week. And to help us through this journey, we're joined by the sensational Lucy Giles from Dog Party. How you doing, Lucy?
Hi guys, I'm Lucy. I'm so excited to be here to talk about Graham because Graham is such an important person to me, and just my musical journey in life.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. That's
As
why
cheesy as it
we wanted you
sounds.
here, because you have that passion for him. That's great. So when did it start? What was your entry point with Graham?
Okay, so it's actually kind of a funny story.
Oh, it better be.
So I was a senior in high school, and this guy asked me out on a date, and he pulled up to my house in his cherry red 77 El Camino, and he had a tape deck in there, and so obviously he played the Ramones, I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, which, I mean, if there's any way to win me over, probably that. So props on him for for that. And we were actually going to a Scouse Gets show, which was like a Sacramento super group with like Chris Woodhouse, Matt K. Shrug, and like a bunch of other sensational dudes. So after the show, we were back in his car because he was going to take me home. And we were listening to the Ramones. But then he's just like, oh, like, I really want to listen to something else. Like, is it okay if I put on what I've been listening to lately? And I'm like, okay, sure. Like, do whatever you want. And then he asked me, he's all, do you listen to country music? And I was like, no. And then he's like, okay, whatever. But this is Graham Parsons. Like, I've just been really into him lately. So he puts on the tape and I'm listening to it. And I was just like, whoa. Like, this is interesting. Like, I definitely, at this like point in my life, I was very much like rock and roll. I was very much punk rock. So hearing it, I wasn't totally up to embrace it, but then I wasn't like being stingy about it either. I was being like pretty open about it. And I really liked what I had heard. And, you know, we started dating. So then he showed me more, and that's just when the ball started rolling. So basically, like, my introduction to country music was Graham Parsons, and then it shifted to like Elvis, Sun Sessions, and then another big player was Ernest Tubb. I was obsessed with the song "Walking the Floor Over You," and but Graham was very different from everybody else, and it was super easy for me to relate to Graham's music because he was so rough around the edges, yet he was so passionate. And those are two things that really like come forward in punk music a lot. So the translation was just super, super easy. And I feel like it was just perfect that he was my first like step into country music.
I love that that's the story for someone who comes from a punk background and not necessarily your standard, you know, outlaw country, you know, sort of like Hank the Third kind of thing, which like is more common to hear coming from a punk background. So it's so pure that it came, you know, I'm going to be cheesy, but it came from a place of love, like young love and everything. That's wonderful. Like, it's great. So you hadn't really, I'm assuming like country music wasn't really around the house growing up that much?
No, certainly not. My dad was a huge fan of music. So growing up, I was exposed to awesome bands. He was really into like the 2000s rock revival. So the White Stripes were very prominent. Dandy Warhols and like LCD Sound System, Brian Jonestown Massacre.
You were into hip stuff.
Yeah. So that's what was going on. And my dad, both my parents were not musicians at all. And it's kind of like my sister and I that found playing musical instruments, but it was definitely my dad's passion for music is what really inspired us. But I even went on my own journey with punk rock because my dad was never really into the Ramones ever. He did love X, and he actually saw X a couple times, like in the early 80s when they came to Sacramento, which is really cool. But I was the one that really like had my own musical journey like in middle school with punk rock, the Ramones, and like mid to late 70s punk rock. And then when I was in high school, I was heavily into garage rock and like Ty Segall, the OCs, all that stuff that Chris Woodhouse recorded. My sister and I, we recorded several albums with him. I was just, you know, the whole Shannon and the Clams.
Yo, I love them. Yeah.
The Babies are like one of my all-time favorite bands.
Oh, yeah.
So that's really what I was listening to at the time. And so this whole country music thing, it just took me by surprise. And one of the things that lures most people in to country music is the simple poetry and the just the the emotion in it. There's a country song for every feeling that you have, and it's so relatable in so many ways. And so it was just so funny when I was getting into it, because part of me like didn't want to like country music because of just the stereotypes around it and how it's perceived like by society today. Like when people ask me nowadays, like, oh, like, what do you listen to? I'm always like, country music. I don't think about it. I just say it. And then they're like, what? And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not talking about, like,
because they're thinking of new country music, which is its literal own genre. Like, set in stone, there's new country and there's country. You like country. Very, very different. Well, that's wonderful. I'm excited for the show. For those of you tuning in who maybe haven't seen the show before, the way it works is when we have a guest on, we have them curate a playlist just for that episode. So back at the Stab Comedy Theater, our producer and engineer is going to be sort of DJing the show for us. He's going to be playing short clips from Lucy's playlist, and then we're going to hear them, and then we're going to talk about them. How does that sound, Lucy?
Sounds great.
It sounds great. Well, with that, Jesse, will you please play us that first sweet song? Whenever you're ready, Jesse.
Is that not coming through for you? I thought we tested this earlier.
No.
All right. Well, let's play the game. Okay. 1 second. Let's try it again.
Well, you can keep talking while he's working on it.
Yeah. I was thinking any second now.
It's very, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but Graham is a very good introduction to country because for me, at least, it was the first time that country music sounded cool to my tastes.
Yeah.
Like, because I also like was a, I was a everything but country person all through high school, and then honestly all through most of college too. And then once I discovered the Beach Boys and my whole classic rock revival thing started, where I was suddenly not too cool for classic rock. And I didn't care what the punks thought of me anymore because I wasn't trying to fit in with them anymore. And then from there, though, as I got into the Byrds, I had no idea that there was like a second half of the Byrds where they were a country rock band. And so Graham being kind of the gateway into that, it really was just like, whoa, this kind of music can sound cool and compelling, and it doesn't have to be the stereotype that everyone kind of thinks it is. Which is also what he was trying to do in bringing that music back into the popular eye.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, like, even when Graham met Emmylou was a folk singer, and Graham was the one that really introduced country music to her, like the Louvin Brothers and like early Everly Brothers and stuff like that. And she, like, in interviews has said, like, I honestly just associated country music with being a Republican. And that was something that I did not want to be, like, I was just not into it. And she said, like, you really opened up my eyes to some beautiful music. And she was just hooked after that. And her whole career and her whole life changed. So,
yeah. It's wild how a person can have that effect on someone, getting sentimental about it there, but like that is, and we all have that as far as, the boy that showed you Graham, and like we all have like different people who, just open one door that leads to so many other doors. Right. Yeah. And it's just wild the way that works.
Yeah, I think that my taste in music around the house has just been insufferable for Angela and my roommate, because I've just been listening to so much country and bluegrass stuff. Yeah. Just constant picking. Well,
there's that old joke, like, how do you get a divorce? Start playing the banjo? Or something like that.
I have one, but I can't play it very well. I've had it since high school, though.
All right, let's see if we've got this worked out. Probably not, but let's see.
Yeah, we'll try.
We're in.
All right, that was You Don't Miss Your Water by the Byrds. And like we had mentioned earlier, Graham Parsons was in the Byrds for a very brief period of time, and the music that they put out sounded very different from the traditional sound that we all know as the Byrds. Mm-hmm. And so Graham's connection and his time in the Byrds was actually pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so
Probably the juiciest sort of, I don't
Yeah.
know, like for my idea of it.
yeah. Okay. I got some juice. Okay. So, Chris Hillman was the one that introduced Graham to Roger, and they were looking for. And if you guys don't know, Roger McGuinn is the main dude of the Byrds.
Yeah,
They were looking for they were looking for a keyboard player, and a lot of people don't know that Graham Sinkin slayed the keys. He was a brilliant piano player, just absolutely great. So when Graham joined the band, he kind of talked everybody into doing this country direction, and everyone agreed. I think Roger was kind of, because the Byrds were like huge in the United States at this point. They were one of the top rock bands, and they were doing that whole psych rock thing. And Roger was pretty eccentric and kind of weird and didn't really want to stick with that. And so they just decided to listen to Graham. He was pretty much the little leader. And he convinced everybody to head on down to Nashville and let's record a record. So they actually went to Nashville in 1968 and recorded at the Columbia recording studio with Gary Usher. He was the producer.
I love Gary Usher too. I bring him up pretty much every episode. Gary Usher or his circle of people come up.
Yeah.
So, what's interesting about that record is, okay, so going into listening to that record for the first time, I knew that Graham was a part of it, and I was super excited. And it's like a legendary record, so I was like, I'm so excited to listen to this. And when I heard it, I was like so underwhelmed by it. And I was like, what the heck? Like, where's Graham? Like, he's hardly on here. He's on like one song. Like, what's the deal? And I had known that Roger was pretty difficult to get along with, and so was Graham, and that Roger didn't really like Graham very much, and Graham's time in the band was super short. He was only in there for like a year. So I had just assumed, I was like, oh, he probably didn't like Graham, and then that's why his presence on the record wasn't really felt. And then I listened to the extended version, and it had like all these takes, and Graham was on them. And Don't Miss Your Water is one of those that they overdubbed on the record, and it's Roger's vocal as lead. And so that was one of the reasons why I specifically picked that song for this playlist, was because that is not the record that everybody heard, or not the song everybody heard in 1968. They heard the Roger version, but Graham's version, there is so much emotion in it. I really recommend everyone to just like listen to that song with their eyes closed. It is just so emotional, and that's one thing that Graham could really do, was just really he just had so much passion. So, but anyways, back to what I was saying. So I just thought that Roger didn't like Graham and just kind of like tried to just not really have him on the record at all. However, that is not the case at all. And my jaw was just so dropped when I found out the true story behind Sweetheart of the Rodeo. So Graham Parsons was still technically under contract with his manager at the time because of the band that he had before called International Submarine Band. And they were on a record label called LHI. And that was Lee Hazelwood's record label. So Lee Hazelwood was Graham's manager.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes. So Graham went off with the Byrds because Graham was pretty like impatient and got bored with things really easily. So he was pretty much done with the International Submarine Band before they even released their record. So Graham went off with the Byrds, went to Nashville, recorded the record. It was like all done and everything. And all of a sudden, Columbia gets a phone call, and it's Lee Hazelwood trying to sue them because Graham Parsons was still under contract. So Roger McGuinn and Chris Hillman rushed to the studio and overdubbed by combining their two vocals together. They overdubbed all of Graham's parts, mostly all, with the exception of like Hickory Wind, because they're worried about getting sued by Lee Hazelwood. But it was interesting because Lee Hazelwood's lawyer and Columbia's lawyer was the same person. And
What?
so then that just brought more confusion to the table.
Yeah.
It's
It's inherently a conflict of interest.
Jeez,
Oh,
that
yeah.
makes the later configurations of the Flying Burrito Brothers seem very straightforward by comparison.
I personally love Lee Hazelwood like so much. And so I was blown away when I heard this, but there's an interview that Graham Parsons did where he talks about Lee Hazelwood, and basically he was talking about, originally he was talking about, oh, I had this horrible manager, and he didn't even like go into it. And then like later he's just like, it was Lee Hazelwood. And then he just said he was the most prejudiced, and then he goes and stops talking. And then he just trails off. And then Lee Hazelwood got brought up later in the conversation because Graham was talking about Waylon Jennings. And the interviewer was like, people project Waylon Jennings to be the next Elvis, but it kind of didn't happen. Why do you think this happened? And then he goes on to talk about how Chet Atkins was totally the wrong producer for Waylon, and how he was too stingy and too sterile of an environment because Chet Atkins didn't like do drugs or anything, and really like was strict about it. And then he goes on to Lee Hazelwood, and he's just like, yeah. And then he had another horrible producer, Lee Hazelwood. And he said, Lee Hazelwood, just because he cut Dwayne Eddy and a couple of other hits, Nancy Sinatra, he thinks that he knows everything about music. He said that Lee Hazelwood wishes that he knew, or what did he say? He said, Waylon Jennings knows, now I can't remember what the exact quote was, but basically he was saying that Waylon Jennings knows like a whole lifetime of music knowledge, and Lee Hazelwood doesn't. Lee Hazelwood doesn't know anything. So I just thought that story was so crazy. And then the reason why Graham even got involved with Lee Hazelwood in the first place was because of Lee Hazelwood's girlfriend at the time. Her name was Susie J. Holcomb, and she was the producer on the International Submarine Band record.
Oh.
Yeah,
Wow.
and then so she was like, Lee, put this out. And like Lee Hazelwood was like, meh, like, I don't really know. And then Graham tried to cause trouble and tried to leave before International Submarine Band was able to put out the record. And that was very off-putting to Lee. And then so that is one of the major reasons why the International Submarine Band record kind of flopped.
Yeah, because
And-
it got delayed quite a while and didn't come out
Yeah.
until kind of after this stuff had hit, right?
Yeah, I mean, it might have even came out after the Byrds released Heart of the Rodeo, but yeah, he didn't put a lot of money. Lee Hazelwood did not put a lot of money into the promotion because A, he didn't like Graham, and B, the band was already dissolved
Yeah.
at that point.
Hard to
Graham had
get
left.
behind a product like that if there's
Yeah.
no, like, you don't see any long-term returns with it, you know.
Exactly.
It's like, why bother?
Exactly. But that International Submarine Band record is one of my favorite projects that Graham is on.
I've never heard it.
And
So
It
this
is
excites me.
brilliant.
I wanna go back and hear that now.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear another clip.
Well, a luxury liner, 40 tons of steel. If I don't find my baby now, then I guess I never will. I've been a long lost soul for a long, long time. I've been around. Everybody ought to know what's on my mind. You think I'm lonesome, so do I, so do I. Well, I'm the kind of guy that likes to make a living running round. And I don't need a stranger to tell me that my baby's let me down. You think I'm lonesome?
All right, that was Luxury Liner by the International Submarine Band. So it was great that that song was
Nice.
played just now because we were already talking about it.
Nice.
So right off the bat with that song, one of the super cool things that really caught my attention is that Graham's vocals are hard doubled,
Mhm.
and that is really uncharacteristic of the time period. And also super sick. I didn't really know like who produced the record. There's not that much information on that record out there, but it is indicated that Susie J. Hokum was the one that produced it, so that's also badass. Like it's a
Seriously,
gal that
like
did it.
especially for that era, like
Yeah.
that just I can't think of any names offhand, and that probably has to do with just not being very learned in this regard, because I'm sure they existed, but I can't
But there
think
weren't
of
that
any offhand.
many. Yeah,
Exactly,
there weren't
yeah.
that many.
And that is so cool, like to have made something, and also this kind of music, which is
Exactly.
we're going back to how inherently stiff and conservative country music typically is. To have a
Mhm.
woman at the board, like that's amazing.
Yeah,
Most
and
definitely.
especially with the big labels, those like staff producers, that was a real boys club.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
that was that probably was not easy to be a woman in that scene, trying to like
Mhm.
deal with like 60s record company guys. Ugh. That
Oh
would
God,
be
no.
so rough.
No thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so
But this is a great song. I really
Yeah.
like this song.
that song called Luxury Liner was actually written by Graham. So this is another interesting thing to note. So when I first got into Graham, I was kind of shocked by the amount of covers that he did. I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. But that's just because of the mindset that I have, like, as a musician nowadays and, like, how things are nowadays. And I had
Mhm.
no idea that, like, artists didn't write their own songs back then.
Yeah.
But actually, Graham wrote a lot for someone in that time period. I mean, he didn't write a lot, but he has a very decent amount of songs. So on Safe at Home, which is the International Submarine Band record, he has a handful of songs that he wrote. I think 4. So Luxury Liner is one of them. That song is really just like that nice upbeat tempo. Also interesting to note that Graham was actually afraid of flying, and he had he would fly occasionally, but obviously but sometimes he would just get this really strong fear of flying, and so some of the tours that he did, he took a train. And obviously trains are a really big part of country music, and so of course you got to have a song called Luxury Liner.
And oh, go on. Sorry.
Oh, no,
I was gonna talk about Graham's fear of flying, because it's funny that flying comes up so much in so much of his work. There's Flying Burrito Brothers.
Exactly.
There's Birds, and then
Uh-huh.
he gets kicked out of the band for not wanting to fly to South Africa.
Mhm.
Partially fear of flying. McGuinn and Hillman both say that it's because he just wanted to keep palling around with the Stones.
Yep.
probably Graham says that he was opposed to apartheid. It was probably some combination of the three.
Yeah.
But it's just very interesting that there is so much talk of flight with him. And there's also just the kind of weird coincidence that kind of the other country rock guy to come from the Byrds, Gene Clark, also had a like staggering fear of flying, and that's what also kept him from like kind of fully reaching his potential in a lot of ways too. It's interesting that would just come up so much in a band called the Byrds.
I think it makes sense. You know, it makes sense. Cowboys aren't supposed to fly. You know,
that's true.
They're supposed to. Yeah.
A lot of musicians died flying during that time period just because of like private planes. So I mean, maybe I would have been afraid to fly.
Absolutely. I think it's a legitimate fear, because that's great to point out that it's like so recent at that time. You could name so many names of like, you know, the odds are against me of getting in this plane.
For sure.
Oh no, I'm a rock star and there's 4 other rock stars.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then they all die. Awful. So International Submarine Band was Graham's first band, but it actually wasn't. So interestingly, he had been in bands in high school, which is very cool. He had a, you know, he showed a lot of interest in music at a young age, and that was when he saw Elvis. So it's so cool that a lot of musicians that were like Graham's age and around that time, like they were kids and saw Elvis and were so inspired. I mean, there's just so many. Like the list is literally like, but to name one, Tom Petty. But anyways, so Graham saw Elvis in 1956, and his life definitely changed after that. What is so cool to me is that he really loved the Elvis at Sun sessions, and I really loved the Elvis at Sun sessions. So I just felt like that was like, yes.
Yeah.
And he grew up in Waycross, Georgia. He grew up in an extremely wealthy family, and that is important to note. His mother came from like a citrus fruit like empire out of Florida. Yeah. And his father was actually a World War II pilot. And he was around, I think, during Pearl Harbor, so he was like recognized for that. But Graham had a tragic childhood in that his father committed suicide when he was like 12. And his father was an alcoholic, and so was his mother. And so his mother actually ended up dying from an alcohol-related disease. I think like cirrhosis or something.
Probably. Yeah, cirrhosis of the liver. Yeah.
And it's quite sad because she literally died on his graduation from high school. Yeah, pretty sad. But she had married a feller before she had died, and the guy's last name was Parsons. So then that's why Graham's name is Graham Parsons. His original last name was Connor.
Good change. It's a good change.
Yeah. So Graham did terribly in school. He was not not into it at all. Yet he went to Harvard University, and everyone's like, "What? How?" His test scores were incredibly bad. Apparently, he wrote an exceptional essay which got him in. But I mean, if you have the money that he had, you could pretty much go anywhere. So I think that was a really large factor. And it wasn't until he went to Harvard that he really got into country music. He was super into rock and roll, and he grew up listening to gospel music, which was really important to his musical background. But it wasn't until he was in Harvard that he heard Merle Haggard for the first time, and that's when his life changed. Because during that time, like the hippies and like kind of like cool dudes, they were all into folk music. And so Graham was trying to get into that whole folk music thing. And he was in bands doing that. And I think like the early iterations of the International Submarine Band were really like folk driven. And then he got really into country music because one of his friends who was in the band, I think it was like the pedal steel player. Obviously, the pedal steel player is gonna like country music. So
that's a tough
showed
instrument to
Graham-
get into by accident.
Yeah.
He showed Graham.
You're either at a luau or a hoedown. You got two options.
He really got
Yeah.
Graham into Merle, and then that's when it was that guy who was like, dude, what if we like kind of like rock and roll this thing up a bit? Like, let's try it. So they had very little success on the East Coast, 'cause that's where they were living. And Graham had like $1 bajillion, so he was like, hey fellas, I'll buy us a house in LA, let's go. So Graham bought a house in LA and they all moved there, and then that's when the whole like Lee Hazelwood mix-up happened. And extremely short-lived International Submarine Band, but there are many great songs on that record.
Yeah, I gotta hear that now. Let's hear another song.
You may be sweet and nice, but that won't keep you warm at night. 'Cause I'm the one who showed you how to do the things you're doing now. He may feel all your charms. He may hold you in his arms, but I'm the one who let you in. I was right beside you then.
All right, that was Hot Burrito number 1 by the Flying Burrito Brothers. That is one little emotional ballad right there. Grandma loved ballads. They were pretty much like his thing. And that one is a definitely like a shining star on that record. And there's also, if you're wondering, since it's called Hot Burrito number 1.
We are.
There is a Hot Burrito number 2 that falls directly after it, which is also just great.
Later on, there's a Hot Burrito number 3, but there's no burritos in the band at the time. It's very weird. It's in like the late 70s iteration.
So weird.
Yeah.
So let's get into the Flying Burrito Brothers.
Please.
So the year is 1969. Graham Parsons, like Court was saying, was fired. Like, any story surrounding Graham is not really like straight. Like, Graham will say, oh, I left it. I wasn't feeling enchanted anymore. So like, just
Right.
and then everyone else is like, yeah, no, I fired him. So the story was, though, Graham did not want to go on tour with the Byrds to South Africa because he did not believe in the political stuff that was going on there, and he was hanging out with the Rolling Stones, which is definitely another large theme in his story. So
yeah, there's like
apparently,
pre-Stones Graham and post-Stones Graham.
yeah. So apparently, Chris Hillman, after that tour, came back to LA and met with Graham and was like, dude, I'm so sorry. I should not have gone to South Africa. Like, I don't.
My bad.
Yeah, I don't want to be in the Byrds. Probably because Chris didn't really like Roger McGuinn. I'm guessing because Graham didn't have really great things to say about Roger McGuinn. He said that, like, if you had any outside ideas, Roger would get really like uptight and just try to be like the boss of everything. But at the same time, like, he was the boss of that band. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
but you know,
Someday we're gonna do a deep birds history dive, and I'm gonna lead the way on that.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because I love Roger McGuinn, despite him being such a cranky guy. And the later iterations of the band too, like the Clarence White years. Like Clarence White is a genius of a guitar player, and it just doesn't get talked about because it's on these Birds albums people don't have.
Yeah.
But we should get back to the burritos.
Okay. So Graham, he was friends with this dude named Chris Etheridge, and they were already jamming. And then Chris Hillman was like, "Yo, what are you doing?" So Graham was
Direct
like, "All
quote.
right." Yeah. Graham was like, "Two Chris's, let's do it." So they formed the Flying Burrito Brothers, and the Graham, or the Parsons and the Hillman songwriting duo, they were great. However, they did not write Operator Number 1 or 2 together. But just them working as a duo really worked for that time. And then Chris Etheridge was kind of different. He did not like country music as much as Chris Hillman and Graham did. They were like country music freaks. Etheridge, not so much. And so they didn't really have like a drummer. So they went into the studio after Graham and Chris Hillman really started writing all these really great songs. And there's like multiple drummers on the record. That Gilded Palace of Sin is what it's called. I don't think I mentioned that. It was released in 1969, and they were on A&M Records at the time. And the dude that produced it was named Henry Louis, and then this other dude named Larry Marks. So nobody knew what to do when that record came out. Literally no one. They were like, well, we could try to market this as a country music record. Did terribly. We can try to market this as a rock and roll record / psych rock record. Did terribly. So it didn't even chart. And yeah, I mean, like, the record cover alone is like so badass. Like,
yeah,
first
it's
of
so
all,
great.
we have all the dudes in their nudie suits. We got Graham, Chris Hillman,
And
then,
his awesome blue one.
Yes, and we cannot forget about Sneaky Pete. Sneaky Pete was the pedal steel player. His nudie suit is quite different from the other guys. It's kind of like this weird, like, long sleeve sweatshirt. Like, it kind of reminds me of like a Gildan like sweatshirt, and it has this giant yellow pterodactyl on it, which is just
I'm looking
great.
at it now. It is really weird. I've always noticed that, but I never really thought about it.
Yeah.
That's very weird.
So I've actually seen in person all of the nudie suits except for Chris Etheridge's. I have no idea where his is, but Chris Hillman's, I actually stumbled upon it by complete accident. I was actually at the Gene Autry Museum.
Really?
In Southern California. Yeah. And there's like a bunch of cowboy stuff there. I was doing research for an illustration project I was working on for school. And it was like the end of the museum because it kind of like took you through these different rooms. And we were in the room that was really talking about California and just like all this stuff. Like, it had a section on the wildfires that happened. It had a section on like salmon fishing in the rivers, and then all of a sudden I look over and there's Chris Hillman's nudie suit, and I'm like, what the heck? It was so cool though. And then Graham's nudie suit is in the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville. That museum is so cool. I really want to go again because when I went the first time, I pretty much was only obsessed with Graham and like Elvis and Wanda Jackson and Hank Williams and no one else really. Ernest Tubb, yes. No one else really, but oh my god, I would freak out if I went in there now.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But what is so disappointing is like the first half of the museum is beautiful, and there's just hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions probably, worth of like cars and just expensive guitars and like the coolest nudie suits ever and just the coolest clothes. And then you get to the end and you see on mannequins like ripped up like gray acid wash like t-shirts and like ripped jeans for like the new country guys.
Oh,
It's like,
oh,
you guys
gotcha.
are
Yeah, I
fucking-
wasn't following for a minute there, and I was like,
Yeah.
well, why
Like-
would they have that? Oh,
What an anticlimax
that's
for what I
why.
imagine. Because, like, I don't have much interest in visiting, like, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or things like that. But the country, like, being able to... Country has so many artifacts around
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
It's very, like, legendary in that kind of way.
Yeah,
You
I
have,
think
you
it's
have
because it's a
musicians
sort
with
of
their
music
famous,
that, yeah. Sorry,
with
go
their
on.
famous guitars and their famous outfits or their famous cars and stuff. And there is a lot of it does seem like there's more of like a
mythology.
tangible history left behind by old country
Yeah.
music that you don't necessarily have with other forms of music. The
Definitely.
like relics and artifacts didn't
Oh, yeah.
haven't survived in the same way.
Mhm.
I agree. It's like an industry that like immediately mythologized itself as it went along. Like tradition is so important, so every step of the way, everything is preserved because it's like, well, this is going to be important. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have that as much with rock and roll. Like you started to get that a little later once the idea of classic rock became a thing. Then people started paying attention like that. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's awesome. I want to go there now. Like
It is so
that hasn't
big.
been on my radar, but I really want to go now. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's really cool. Like, there's a lot of cool things in there. But the Country Music Hall of Fame is like, oh my god, it is so beyond cool. So Gilded Palace of Sin, such a cool name for a record too. What is so cool about that record, and definitely catches you off guard, is the pedal steel. So Sneaky Pete. I was listening to interviews with Graham, and he was saying that they selected Sneaky Pete because he was the only pedal steel player that played country music around the bars in LA. But they did add distortion to that pedal steel, and it sounds outrageous, like outrageously cool. I didn't even know what it was at first.
Like
That
on
was
wheels, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like that
Definitely featured on
sound.
wheels. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really aware of the pedal steel. It's one of my favorite instruments now.
Oh yeah.
But definitely hearing it for the first time was like, whoa. And then hearing it for the first time, but it having distortion was insane.
There's nothing like it. I've recently started getting like back into love with that sound because I've been listening to a ton of the Tragically Hip, and they use a lot of pedal steel on their stuff, but not in a country way, which is very interesting. Yeah, but there's nothing that sounds like that instrument. It's so unique.
It is so cool.
Any final thoughts on the Flying Burrito Brothers, or you want to hear another clip?
Let's hear another one.
All right, let's hear another.
Brass buttons, green silks and silver shoes. Warm evenings, pale mornings, bottom blue. And tiny golden pins that she wore up in her hair. Brass buttons, green silks and silver shoes. My mind was small and then it grew. My thoughts known only by a few. A dream much too real to be leaned against too long. And all the time I guess
So that was Brass Buttons by Graham Parsons. I added that one on because that one's just so like heartwarming to me. I know that I'm like saying that about like all the songs, but that song is actually my most listened to song on Spotify. Like it
really?
has not, the record has not been beat by any other song, and that one just remains at number one. And, okay, so where to start on this song? So that recording, I don't know what year it was, but I'm guessing it had to have been around 66 or 65. And that is just Graham Parsons alone with his guitar, and it's a demo of the song. And that song is actually very touching to him, as he wrote it about his mother, who had passed away with cirrhosis and was addicted to alcohol. So he kind of brings that up. He says like bottle blues in there. And he struggled with many addictions himself. So interestingly, that song, he re-recorded it on his last record, Grievous Angel, which was released after he died in 1974. And I do not like that version nearly as much. I definitely like the demo version. It's much softer and it's very emotional, and it's just him and his guitar. And sometimes like when I'm writing songs, the demo version, when it's just me alone with my guitar, like right when I wrote it and it's so fresh, it's so much more like emotional. And sometimes I wish that I could just drag that emotion like into the recording, but sometimes it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a craft for sure. Like in some ways, like, you know, being cynical here, but manufacturing that authenticity in a studio can be very difficult, you know, because there's nothing like when it's just in your living room and you're just pouring out a feeling, because you need to get the feeling out, and you're not thinking about the end result. You're just trying to get the feeling out. Nothing like it. This is a beautiful song. And talking about how it's a demo, like I like how, you know, some of the strings almost even sound like maybe slightly out of tune at some times.
Yep. And he talks in it too.
Yeah,
He's like,
it's just, that gets me. And I know that's like, those are the easy things to reach for when we're talking about lo-fi music and stuff. But like, you know, it works for a reason. Like it hits you on a level.
I think that much more so than studio versions of songs, it does capture that artist in that moment in their life much, much more than once it's gone through like a rewrite process and talked to other band members and it's gone through like production, like all of that stuff. Like, it's kind of like a tiny little snapshot of like Graham Parsons, like in his bedroom or wherever, making these demos, and it just kind of puts you right there with him in a way that studio recordings just don't have the same impact.
Yeah, and even like the words change a lot, like you were mentioning, like if other band members have anything to say about the song. But in Brass Buttons off of Grievous Angel, the words are different. He changes one of my favorite lines, and I'm like, why did you do that? Like there's one line that's different that just happens to be one of my favorites, which I did want to say what my favorite verse in that song was, because it's just so touching. It's her words still dance inside my head. Her comb still lies beside my bed, and the sun comes up without her. It doesn't know she's gone, but it remembers nothing that she said. So that's what he said in his demo version, which is so just like, like, wow. And
Graham, it's a gut punch.
Yeah, the feeling of not being remembered after you've passed, like that hits you on such a human lizard brain level of like, I want people to grieve when I'm gone. I want people to remember me, and the sun doesn't know she's even gone.
Yeah, and what's crazy is he changed that line to the last one. He says, it just doesn't know she's gone. Oh, but I remember everything she said, which has, you know, it's cool, but it's just like, like it
brutal, kind of a different meaning.
Yeah, he literally said, and it remembers nothing that she said, and like that is crazy. So that's that little one.
We should get into Graham's his unfortunate death, since we are getting to the end of the show and we're talking about that last record. Because it is a wild story, so we should cover that.
And I just want to point out, because like I haven't been paying close enough attention to the time, what we just heard will be the last clip. But I do want to end on this conversation. So before we get heavy, though, because I don't want to lose time for it at the end. I want to have a quick plug for Lucy. Anything that's going on that people can find you and keep up with new dog party happenings and whatnot.
All right. So Dog Party actually just did a live stream for the Crest Theater.
Oh, cool.
That is available on YouTube.
I'm sure they can find it if they just Google those keywords.
Yeah, and then another thing I wanted to mention was Dog Party's website, which has an online store connected, which you can purchase any of our physical material as well as soft goods such as t-shirts and, pins and all sorts of fun things. But I also wanted to add that connected to the Dog Party website is my own little, it's called Lucy's Art Roundup. And that's where I have all of my artwork for sale, as well as bolo ties, bandanas, stickers,
Nice.
Lots of fun little things. Unfortunately, I do not have a drawing of Graham Parsons yet. However, I am looking to do a Graham Parsons and Emmylou sticker pack soon.
I'm going to
hopefully.
buy that as soon as it's available.
Yeah, that's a pre-order for sure. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being on. We're not going to wrap up just yet. I just wanted to get a thank you real quick in there because this has just been a real treat for both of us. So let's get into the heavy stuff before we go. We've got like 3 minutes, I think, left. Actually, we have no time left. Real quick, he died.
You guys can go ahead and take a little bit of time if you want.
Are you sure?
We'll make
I know
it.
We got the next one coming up.
We'll make it work. That's all right. I don't want to rush you guys out. We'll make it work.
Okay. All righty.
Thank you, Jesse.
Give us in a nutshell. Give us the elevator pitch of Graham Parsons' death.
Okay. So, as we mentioned before, Graham Parsons hung out with Keith Richards a lot, and they did a lot of drugs. So Graham Parsons took Keith Richards to Joshua Tree, California all the time to do drugs and stare at the stars looking for UFOs. So, short story is Graham, one of his friends unexpectedly died. And at his funeral, Graham turned to his other friend and said, "Bro, if I die, I want my ashes spread in Joshua Tree, specifically on this rock called Cap Rock." And his friend was like, whoa. Friend was also his roadie/manager. His name was Phil Kaufman. Anyways, so Graham had just recorded Grievous Angel, and they went to Joshua Tree to party a bit before the release of the record and before they were going on tour. And Graham was with a couple girls, and he hadn't been doing heroin at that point. Got really, really drunk. No one else was drinking. And so he said, "Oh, I'm going to drink for everybody." So he drank for everybody and then bought random heroin. It was actually morphine. Random morphine off of this random girl and took the morphine and basically started dying directly after that. They put him in a bathtub filled with ice, trying to revive him, tried to give him coffee. He could not be revived. So they took him to the hospital. He was dead. And then his body was transported to LAX, right? And Phil Kaufman did not know that he wasn't there. And then he was like, "Oh my God, well, I got to get the body back to Joshua Tree." So he went to LAX, took a hearse, was his friend's hearse, randomly had a hearse. I don't know.
Was it Neil Young's hearse?
No, it was like one of the girls' hearses, like her dad's hearse. Took the hearse, went to LAX, was like, "Hey, we gotta get something out here." And the guys were like, "Go ahead." So they literally...
He has a hearse.
Yeah. They took Graham's body out of the airport somehow, put it in the hearse, just hightailed it to Joshua Tree. But they were all extremely drunk. There were like beer cans flying out the window, liquor bottles everywhere. Somehow managed to get to Joshua Tree. I think a cop saw them and started chasing them. Got to Cap Rock. They dumped a bunch of gasoline on his body, lit a match, and then it turned into a fireball. So then the cops really saw them. So then they got back in the car. It was like Phil and some other dude. They got back into the car and started driving away. Did not get caught. for literally stealing the body, but then they got pulled over near Los Angeles for drunk driving. It's like, what the hell? Like, you literally just got away with stealing a body, and then you got pulled over, like, later. Why? And then they were never arrested for it because there were no laws stating that you could not steal a body that had already been dead. So they were fined $750.
Yeah, that's definitely unprecedented.
Yeah, the body was then taken to, I do believe, I don't know why I don't know this off the top of my head. I think it was Louisiana. Yeah, it was taken to Louisiana. That's where he's buried because that's where his stepdad was from.
Mm.
Well, I learned a lot today. I hope you folks learned a lot too. You at home watching. This has really been a treat. This is, I think, one of our best episodes. Like, just with the passion that Lucy brought to the table. This has been great. So thank you all for tuning in. Please join us next week, where it'll be another thing we'll do.
We already have next week lined up.
Really? Oh,
yeah,
do
we have Eric Wynn from the radio show Goth Yearbook, which is like a post-punk, new wave generally. But he is going to grace us with his yacht rock knowledge.
Oh, nice.
Sweet.
Yes. Very cool. Yes. So you got to tune in for that, folks. And please follow us, as always, at Dad Rock Talk on Instagram. Where can people follow you on the internet, Lucy?
You can follow me on Instagram. It's at Lucy Ramone. And then my band's page is at Dog Party. And, yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you again so much for being here. This has been fun. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys, one more time. Thank you, Lucy, Corey, and Court. Don't go away too far, everybody. In about 25 minutes, the Stab Show will be... oh, so hold on. Let's get the right playlist here. There we are. Stab Show will be coming up with Christy Farley, Rhoda Ramone, Tyler Kenny. Gonna be a fun one. So join us back here, top of the hour, 8 o'clock. We'll see you then. Sec. Just trying to raid. See if we got anywhere to raid people over to. Let's go over here.